The atmosphere inside the executive boardroom was electric with tension, so dense it felt almost tangible, as a security guard's hand lingered just a few inches away from Judge Judy's shoulder. What unfolded in the following minute would uncover a conspiracy so disturbing that it would shake the foundations of corporate law firms across the United States, leaving millions rethinking their understanding of justice within the legal system. Judge Judy, the strong-willed television judge who had earned unwavering respect over decades, stood encircled by corporate security staff. Her eyes burned with controlled anger, the kind that comes from discovering a truth powerful enough to dismantle entire empires built on manipulation of the law. The chief of security, his voice strained with urgency, delivered the message that would set everything in motion. Judge Sheindlin, Karen Morrison has personally instructed that you be removed from these premises immediately. But what neither Karen Morrison nor her team of high-powered attorneys realized was that Judge Judy had already spent 3 weeks quietly investigating Morrison Industries. What she uncovered was a sprawling network of legal corruption reaching from small-town courtrooms all the way to the upper tiers of corporate America. This wasn't just unethical behavior. It was a calculated system. A strategy designed to exploit legal loopholes as weapons, crushing innocent families while generating millions in profit. The security team expected obedience. Maybe a silent departure to avoid public embarrassment, just like so many others who had backed down when confronted with Morrison Industries' overwhelming legal force. What they didn't expect was what Judge Judy had tucked inside her briefcase. Evidence so devastating it could reveal how the legal system itself had been turned against the very people it was meant to protect. This was no ordinary corporate clash or battle of egos. At the center of it all was Martha Rodriguez, a 67-year-old grandmother whose family restaurant had been systematically destroyed by Karen Morrison's legal team. Driven into bankruptcy and an early grave, while Morrison celebrated another win at her country club, Judge Judy locked eyes with the nervous security chief, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Tell Karen Morrison that I have proof of what she did to Martha Rodriguez and many others, and nothing will stop me from presenting it to that auditorium full of her business partners." Her words hung heavy in the air, like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Because what she was about to reveal wouldn't just show that Karen Morrison bent the rules, it would prove she had completely shattered them, leaving devastation in her wake. If you're ready to witness the moment when one of America's toughest judges confronted a deeply corrupt corporate powerhouse, stay with this story, because what unfolded would challenge everything people believed about justice in the corporate world. This wasn't just drama. It was a powerful lesson in what happens when someone with real authority refuses to be silenced by wealth or intimidation. Everything began 3 weeks earlier on what seemed like a completely ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that starts quietly but carries the potential for something extraordinary. Judge Judy was seated in her Manhattan office, reviewing case files, when her assistant knocked and entered holding a phone. The look on her face made it clear this wasn't a routine call. On the line was Rebecca Martinez, personal assistant to Karen Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, one of the East Coast's most influential corporate consulting firms. Her tone was smooth and polished, filled with the kind of carefully rehearsed charm that high-end PR teams train their clients to use. Every word was chosen to project importance and exclusivity. "Judge Sheindlin," Rebecca began, her voice radiating enthusiasm. "Ms. Morrison would be truly honored if you would consider serving as the keynote speaker at our annual Corporate Legal Excellence Summit. We're expecting over 2 of the nation's most influential executives, business leaders, and legal professionals." She paused deliberately, allowing the scale of the invitation to sink in before continuing. M's. Morrison specifically requested you because she believes your perspective on justice and accountability could offer invaluable insight. Helping these leaders understand how proper legal strategies can lead to both ethical and profitable outcomes. But Judge Judy hadn't spent decades in the legal system by taking things at face value, especially when they came wrapped in corporate jargon and delivered with theatrical enthusiasm. Something about Rebecca's pitch didn't sit right. It struck a discordant note deep within her instincts. The phrase profitable outcomes lingered like a warning sign. From her experience, whenever corporations started talking about profit and legal processes in the same sentence, it usually meant someone was about to suffer. And it certainly wouldn't be the ones with expensive lawyers. Rebecca continued, unaware of the growing skepticism. This year's summit theme is maximizing legal advantages in modern business. We believe your expertise can help attendees navigate complex challenges while maintaining the highest standards of corporate responsibility. The words flowed smoothly, but Judge Judy's internal alarm bells were already ringing. Over the years, she had learned that when people talked about maximizing advantages and corporate responsibility together, it often meant they were preparing to cross ethical lines, just carefully enough to avoid consequences. The compensation package only added to her suspicion. A generous 5-figure speaking fee, luxury accommodations, and what was described as a rare opportunity to influence how America's business leaders approached legal decisions. It was almost too perfect. But Judge Judy had built her reputation on reading between the lines, and what she saw there made her uneasy. This didn't feel like an invitation to share wisdom. It felt like an attempt to use her credibility to legitimize questionable practices. As Rebecca wrapped up, emphasizing how much the business world would benefit from Judge Judy's unique approach to efficient legal resolution, the judge couldn't help but wonder, what exactly did Morrison Industries expect her to say? Were they hoping she would teach executives how to pressure plaintiffs into settlements or provide tactics to overwhelm smaller law firms with endless paperwork and delays? The thought alone made her blood pressure rise. If there was one thing she could never tolerate, it was the misuse of legal power to crush those who couldn't defend themselves. Her response, however, remained calm and controlled. Years on the bench had taught her the importance of gathering information before acting. Miss Martinez, she said evenly, revealing just enough interest to keep the conversation alive. This certainly sounds like an impressive event. I'd like some time to review the materials and consider how I might contribute meaningfully. What she didn't say was that she had already decided to investigate Morrison Industries on her own. Something about the invitation felt off, and Judge Judy never walked into anything unprepared. After ending the call, she sat silently for several minutes, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline as her mind processed everything. The pieces were beginning to form a picture she didn't like, but she needed proof. The next morning, a courier delivered a sleek invitation package. At first glance, it looked impressive, glossy brochures highlighting past speakers who specialized in helping corporations refine legal strategies and reduce litigation risks. The agenda featured sessions on topics like advanced settlement tactics, leveraging procedural advantages, and managing class action exposure. These weren't discussions about fairness or justice. They were strategic blueprints designed to teach corporations how to dominate legal battles. But what caught Judge Judy's attention most was the profile of Karen Morrison herself. The official version portrayed her as a visionary leader who had revolutionized corporate legal consulting. What it didn't mention was the quiet network of lawyers who had encountered her in court. Stories of intimidation, manipulation, and exploiting power imbalances to crush weaker opponents. Closing the packet, Judge Judy reached for her phone and dialed a trusted contact, Tony Chen, a former NYPD detective now working as a corporate investigator. "Tony," she said when he answered, "I need you to dig into Morrison Industries and Karen Morrison. I want everything: financials, legal cases, complaints, and especially patterns in their litigation history." She paused briefly, already sensing what he might uncover. "And Tony, I have a feeling this one's going to be ugly." As she hung up, a familiar determination settled over her. If Morrison Industries believed they could use her reputation to legitimize predatory legal tactics, they had chosen the wrong judge. The summit was still 2 weeks away, but her real investigation had just begun. Tony Chen's first set of findings arrived on Judge Judy's desk 72 hours later, sealed inside a plain manila folder that somehow felt far heavier than its physical weight. The moment she opened it, her worst suspicions were confirmed and then exceeded. What she read made her hands tremble with restrained anger. Judge Judy quickly realized that Morrison Industries hadn't merely bent legal rules. They had transformed the system itself into a calculated weapon. Their strategy was precise, deliberate, and devastating, targeting small businesses, elderly individuals, and working-class families who lacked the resources to fight back against an army of corporate attorneys. The cases Tony compiled painted a chilling picture. There was Robert Chen, a 54-year-old contractor who had simply tried to collect payment for completed work. In response, Morrison's legal team buried him under a flood of lawsuits, 17 separate motions, endless depositions, and years of procedural delays. The case dragged on for 3 years, draining him financially until his business collapsed under legal costs, forcing him into bankruptcy, while Morrison Industries labeled it another successful risk management outcome. Then came Harold and Marge Peterson, a couple in their 70s. After Harold was injured by a defective ladder produced by one of Morrison's clients, they filed a legitimate product liability claim. What followed was relentless. Morrison's legal machine subjected them to invasive demands, scheduled depositions during Harold's cancer treatments, and filed motion after motion designed to exhaust their already limited resources. Eventually, the Petersons gave up, not because they were wrong, but because they simply couldn't afford to continue fighting. But it was the file labeled Martha Rodriguez that stopped Judge Judy cold. Martha had owned a small family restaurant in Queens for over 2 decades. It wasn't just a business. It was a cornerstone of her community, employing local families and serving authentic food rooted in generations of tradition. When a client of Karen Morrison attempted to purchase her property for development, Martha politely declined. She had always dreamed of passing the restaurant on to her children. Karen Morrison's response was swift and ruthless. Within weeks, Martha's restaurant was overwhelmed by legal chaos. Health inspections suddenly flagged violations that had never existed before. Zoning issues appeared out of nowhere. Lawsuits piled up, each one draining her savings and time. It was a coordinated attack designed not to seek justice, but to force her into submission. Martha's life's work, built over 20 years, was dismantled in a matter of months. The final page of her file was a handwritten letter from her daughter, Alina. As Judge Judy read it, a heavy silence filled the room. Alina described how her mother had died just 6 months after losing the restaurant, her spirit shattered by a legal system she had trusted. One line stood out above all. She kept saying she didn't understand how being right could still lead to losing everything. That sentence hit harder than anything else. The night before the summit, Judge Judy sat alone in her Houston hotel room, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond her window. Spread out before her was Elena's letter, the most important piece of evidence she had ever held. She wasn't preparing a keynote speech. She wasn't rehearsing talking points. What she was preparing for had nothing to do with corporate presentations and everything to do with confronting a system that had turned justice into a tool for destruction. Elena's words echoed in her mind. She died believing the law had abandoned her. This wasn't about television ratings or public reputation. It wasn't even about her legacy. It was about Martha Rodriguez, a woman who believed in the promise that the legal system would protect people like her. Instead, she had discovered a harsher truth, that in Karen Morrison's world, justice wasn't about right or wrong. It was about power, money, and who could afford to outlast the other. Judge Judy reflected on the oath she had taken years ago, the promise to uphold justice and protect those who couldn't defend themselves. She thought of all the cases she had presided over, all the moments where she had stood between powerful forces and vulnerable individuals. Tomorrow would not be another speaking engagement. Tomorrow would be something entirely different. As she carefully folded Elena's letter and placed it into her briefcase, a deep sense of purpose took hold. She had faced dishonest litigants, manipulative lawyers, and powerful corporations before, but never with stakes this personal. Martha Rodriguez had trusted the system, and it had failed her. Judge Judy would not allow that failure to go unanswered. The woman who would walk into that conference the next morning wouldn't be there to entertain or inspire. She would be there as Martha's voice, armed with evidence, driven by truth, and unwilling to let it be buried. Judge Judy arrived at the Houston Convention Center with Elena Rodriguez's letter secured inside her briefcase and a determination that radiated from her presence. The backstage area buzzed with corporate energy, polished, controlled, and confident, but that atmosphere shifted instantly when 3 security guards approached her with unmistakable intent. Judge Sheindlin, the lead guard, said, his tone uneasy, "There's been a change. Miss Morrison has instructed us to escort you out immediately." His hand hovered near her arm, expecting compliance, but Judge Judy didn't hesitate. She opened her briefcase and pulled out Elena's handwritten letter, holding it up like undeniable proof. Her voice carried the authority of decades in the courtroom. "Before you touch me," she said firmly, "you're going to listen to this." She began reading aloud, calm but filled with controlled intensity. "My mother worked 16-hour days for 20 years building her restaurant. Karen Morrison's lawyers destroyed it in 6 months with lawsuits that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with forcing her to give up." The guards froze, unprepared for the weight of what they were hearing. Then, without warning, the auditorium doors burst open. Judge Judy walked straight down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing through the stunned silence of more than 2,000 executives who had expected a polished corporate speech. On stage, Karen Morrison faltered mid-presentation, her confident delivery collapsing as she saw Judge Judy approaching. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Judy announced, taking control of the microphone from a shocked moderator, "my name is Judge Judy Sheindlin, and I'm here to tell you about Martha Rodriguez, a woman who no longer has a voice because the practices being praised here destroyed her life." A wave of confusion swept across the room. Holding Elena's letter high, Judge Judy continued, her words sharp and unfiltered. "Martha Rodriguez ran a small restaurant in Queens for over 20 years. When she refused to sell her property, she became the target of a coordinated legal attack, one that would make any siege look merciful." Her voice rose as she read directly from the letter. "They filed dozens of legal actions against her. Health violations that appeared overnight, zoning complaints for a building that had always passed inspections, lawsuits designed not to win but to exhaust her financially." The room shifted. Some executives exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing tactics that felt uncomfortably familiar. Judge Judy turned her focus directly toward Morrison. "Karen Morrison," she said, her gaze unwavering, "Martha Rodriguez built something meaningful for her community. Your legal team destroyed it in months using procedural tactics that had nothing to do with justice. How many more lives have been ruined like hers? Morrison tried to regain control, her voice shaky. This isn't the appropriate setting, but Judge Judy cut her off instantly. This is exactly the right place. You brought me here to validate strategies that destroy innocent people. Martha Rodriguez died believing she had failed, when the real failure was a system that allowed you to turn justice into a weapon. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Some attorneys frantically checked their phones. Sponsors quietly slipped toward the exits. Then, from the back of the room, a slow clap began, started by a group of younger lawyers. It spread rapidly, building into a wave of applause that filled the entire auditorium. Security appeared at the edge of the stage. But when the chief saw Judge Judy standing firm and heard the growing support, he simply turned away. Refusing to intervene, Judge Judy delivered her final words like a verdict. Elena Rodriguez asked me to tell the truth. And here it is. When lawyers become hired weapons instead of officers of the court, justice dies. And people like Martha Rodriguez pay the price. Silence, then chaos executives began canceling contracts with Morrison Industries on the spot. Karen Morrison fled the stage, her composure shattered as her empire began to crumble. Inside her own company, whistleblowers started stepping forward. Within hours, Martha Rodriguez's story spread nationwide, sparking federal investigations into corporate legal abuse and inspiring new protections for small businesses. Judge Judy hadn't just exposed one executive. She had ignited a movement. Martha Rodriguez finally had a voice, and this time it was impossible to silence.